official meeting to order. As custom, room, and these I'll start. We'll go over and take table and start back to left on the right.
Like on the Richmond.
County.
Dan Chance, like County. Dave brought down that order here today, Chester County.
Jim Mangus,
Tony Berger, make GRTC. Brand up the GRTC, congratulations.
Bob Harper, specialist, GRTC.
Tom Berger, Ashley Mason, GRTC manager, Janice, executive assistant, Sam, secretary,
John Rose, your CC administration officer. You do the record,
GRTC staff.
That's the
say the GRTC.
Good morning, everyone. We'll follow the agenda that laid out, Mason, you mind leading the quick plan?
Good morning, board chair and the board. The public notice, the agenda and attachments for this May 16th standing meeting of order of GRTC, RideFinders, Old Indian Transit Management Company, were posted on May 8th at RideGRTC.com. Per the notice, already comments received via email by Ashley Simpson prior to 5 p.m. meeting were provided by all members of the board the night before the meeting. Are read during the comment period of the meeting. On 2 minutes each limit and will be included in the minutes of the meeting. Also, for the notice, this meeting is being live streamed on 122. For this meeting, I received one public comment. It is. My name is Bailey, and I am a resident of church for more than 60 years. I can remember when bus fare was 25 cents, 35 cents, and 50 cents. And we had bus tokens, bus tickets, and bus passes at a cheaper rate. By keeping bus fare free or at a cheaper rate, it will help bus riders keep using buses. I also remember when you could choose buses and go from one side of the city to the other in 20 to 40 minutes. I did get a little long from east to 20 minutes. Now you're using six bus to do the same thing. And even though it's called rapid transit, it takes much longer. Pulse buses are not always on time, and connect to the pulse from east end is hard. Now I have to catch 2 or buses to get around the city, and I have to wait 30 minutes to an hour to catch a bus, and walk 2 to 3 blocks for a bus stop. When all the buses are running up and down Wall Street and stopping every 2 to 3 blocks, no one ever had a problem connecting. Since changing bus routes in 2018, it's hard to move around the city. Putting the transfer spots in place, I hope it won't be like the last one, where you had to run gunshots and bright some days. Some of these bus drivers have no respect for anyone, especially elderly, and people with walkers and canes. They can see an elderly person in the back, having a hard time getting on and off the bus, and they won't make any attempts to help them. And all they have to do is to let the ramp down. If you ask them to, they look at you as if said something wrong to them, and then they pull the curb. Don't pull the curb all the time. Let's get the buses running farther and on time management. We're doing other projects outside the city. Wait a minute. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone here? Any that with you, GRTC personnel, other than Mr. Davis and you. Make sure, approval of the board minutes can get some improvement from my last meeting.
So moved.
Second. All right, move second, any questions, comments, concerns? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? All right, we received the packet a couple of days ago, and I can send agenda items. Title 6, May service change analysis, dedicated lane study, CAD on service, review on hardware, technology refresh. Anybody have any comments, questions about any of that?
Just one on the, just check on the care on demand, is the user, is that renewal, done that before? That's not a new thing, numbers, the dollars are about the same as before.
The service, utilization is going up, but yeah, that's existing service.
And the existing dollars are fairly in line with historical use. Thank you, sir.
All right, any other, yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. The dedicated lane study, what's the length of time for that study? And question as it relates to the impact of additional lanes, likely, dedicated lanes in Richmond.
Dedicated lane study will be approximately, sorry. The dedicated lane study will be approximately 11 months long. We're going to start by looking at increasing the dedicated lanes on Pulse, and then we'll move to looking at select places that you can implement them on local fixed route service, kind of focusing on high frequency, high ridership routes.
Okay, I guess I'm the way for the study, in order to get the questions answered that I'm looking for as it relates to the impact in the city, in the entire route.
Just since you got this, what else do you add to, maybe, well, talk to us about the dedicated lane study.
Sure. So what this study is going to do is look at where there would be potential need for additional dedicated lanes, where they would be a benefit improving travel times or improving on-time performance, and then making recommendations based on data analysis system where it's possible, working with stakeholders. Obviously, the city will be very involved in this. So we'll be talking to the DPW staff, the transportation staff. So you'll definitely be involved in the study process, and it'll just be recommendations coming out of it.
So one of the challenges that we had is using parking spaces, and so that's very important that as we look at ways to make bus rapid transit more effective and efficient. The impact that it will have as it relates to additional dedicated lanes and traffic and parking in the city.
That will certainly be considered within the context of the study.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Thank you, Councilwoman. Thank you, Sam. All right, no other questions? Can we, get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
All right, move. Just one second. Second. Move the second. Any questions, comments, concerns? Not all in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Thank you. All right, budget time. This is when the brother's gonna come up and lead us in our budget and capital plan conversation. Now, if we can vote today or defer until next month, right?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So let's hear it and then see what the pleasure of the board is.
Morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. We're on slide 12 here. I know that these were included in the packet. In addition, the draft budget book was circulated among board members early last week. Okay, very similar to when we had a preliminary briefing in the January board meeting. The key assumptions for the 2024 budget was we have our collective bargaining unit contract, which is expiring on September 30th. So the first quarter of 2024 is covered by our existing collective bargaining contract. So we're basically putting in a series of estimates that we discussed at the finance committee in executive session. So we're not going to go into specifics regards to that due to the nature of collective bargaining and negotiations. So what we feel we have put in is adequate variables or assumptions in there with regards to top rate, as other incentives in there, as well as that we assume that we're going to continue with the matching the defined benefit pension plan at the current rate of 12% for the employees and 15% for GRTC, and that we're going to offer both the current Cigna Open Access Plan as well as the Cigna Consumer Driven Wellness Program. And our open enrollment was effective March 1st, 2023, so we already know the results, and that basically will carry us through February of 24. So underlying this budget here that we're viewing is there's a 10 headcount increase in authorized positions from fiscal 23. Currently, there are 63 vacant positions, which is inclusive of 43 vacant operator positions. And these numbers, the vacancies I'm quoting are as of April 30th. I know that we have various bases, but we have to draw the line and calculate this at some point. So in this budget also contemplates 300 authorized positions, FTEs, as in operators, the same number assumption that was in our fiscal 23. Also, key assumptions, insurance and safety reflects our continued participation in the Virginia Transit liability pool. The service levels that we're contemplating in this budget is return to pre-pandemic miles and hours, and this is also inclusive of the expansions of the Route 1 and 1A. And throughout this budget, we're also contemplating investments in the GRTC workforce, market adjustments in wages and salaries, so we retain the employees, staff training and development programs, as well as inclusion of national recruiting advertising programs to make sure that we can get to our number of 300 operators, as well as fill other vacant positions in the organization. One of the things that we talked about earlier in January, our medical benefits renewal, this is a significant item which I'll quantify as we go through the slides later. But we had a 13% premium increase year on year for the coverages. And this is driven by our claims experience rate. So just wanted to call that out. It's about an $855,000 increase if we kept the same mix. But fortunately, we have some more people that opted to go towards consumer driven. So we buffer that increase a little bit. But it's a key item to consider when looking at the budget. Okay, we're just getting this thing. Where's the Zoom on this one? Just zoom in. Just make it just 10 minutes. Sorry about that. Okay, so what we're proposing here is last fiscal 23's approved budget was $64.485 million, so our baseline budget is $74.144. What I also want to comment is last year in our baseline budgets in the prior years, we did not include items that we knew that were going to be ARPA funded or grant funded. However, as we're looking to expand service for 24 and beyond, we're having significant expenses, so we thought that we should include them on there. So you'll see two columns for 24. The far right one are the various expenses related to grant funded projects. You can see it's $7.76 million. So looking at this by the function here on this page, you'll see that the operations is increasing by $6.38 million. And this is primarily in the salaries and wages line of about 5.64. One other anomaly I'll just call out here. In the benefit line, you'll see the benefit lines going down by about $800,000. In 23 and prior, we used to budget in that line items, the sick pay, the vacation and holiday pay for the operators and maintenance. For 24, it's up in the salary lines for each of them. So you'll see about $1.9 million of that, 1.927 million of 5.6 million salary wages and operations is due to the reclassification, sick wages and holiday. The other thing that's also driving the operation increase is the increase in purchase transportation of about $400,000. That's as we went to the new contract, as well as we're seeing month to month, the demand is increasing. So a little bit of higher price, a little more demand than we forecasted. Maintenance in here is showing is that it's an increase of around $2.64 million. That's driven by salaries of $1.1 million, of which $300,000 was the holiday reclass. The other significant item is the cost of compressed natural gas is an increase of $1 million, which is forecasted in there. Last year in the budget process, we were a little bullish on what the thoughts of diesel and gas. So actually in this budget, the price of diesel and gas is going down about $235,000. However, as you all look at your own utility bills, the price of CNG is going up. And we use CNG obviously to power buses as well as to heat the facilities here. Other significant items in maintenance. The maintenance supplies and parts is going up around $800,000. That's being driven in part by tires and tubes as well as the cost of parts, supply chain costs, petroleum costs are driving our expectation for the new tires and tube contract. We're anticipating an increase due to petroleum prices. In addition, the supply chain is continuing to drive higher prices that Tony S sources parts from. The benefit decrease of $815,000, I already talked about. A good portion of that, $2.27 million is the reclass of the holiday. But in there offsetting is our health insurance benefit increase of $726,000. That's the 13% benefit increase that the premium increase, as well as pension expenses is increasing by about $661,000. And that's basically, it's commensurate with the increases in the wages that we're contemplating in the collective bargaining contracts, as well as general market rate adjustments for the non-bargain staff. Insurance and safety, it's down slightly, about $150,000. One part of that is that 2023, there was a rodeo expense. The rodeo expenses related in there, they're not in 24, about $65,000. And then basically the balance of it, about $82,000 is driven by the anticipated renewal premiums that from being in the pool. Planning and scheduling, as you'll see here, it's about a $500,000 decrease on the baseline budget. And what is that? That is driven by the consulting. So in our 2023 plan, we had budgeted a transit strategic plan and the ridership study for about $500,000. Well, going right over to the right, for 24, what we're contemplating in the planning and scheduling grant funded piece, about $7 million. We have the downtown transfer center study for about $563,000. The north-south PRT environmental clearance and conceptual design was about $1.5 million. The western BRT extension for $1.1 million. The east end transfer area for just about $100,000. And then 2 microtransit, one a demo grant for about $900,000, and then a microtransit trip grant for $2.857 million. So that's reflected in the $7 million grant funded projects. In the communications and marketing, it's increasing about $1 million. And this is one of the areas where I said in the prior years, we did not put in the baseline budget items that were funded by ARPA. So this $1 million increase, this is basically the advertising for recruiting ads that you see on the TV as well as the radio. So that's $1 million being funded by ARPA funds in this budget. Off to the right side for the grant funded projects, $750,000. That's comprised of 2 projects. It's the advertising for the Route 60 extension, which is being funded by Chesterfield. And then the other $250,000 is the advertising related to the microtransit pilot, which is being PRPT funded. Going down to the information technology line, we have an increase of about $437,000. The bulk of this, obviously there's some salary adjustments in there, but the bulk of this is being driven by the cost of the software license, maintenance licenses. So we have Oracle in there as well as our total Microsoft Suite and a whole host of others. In the administrative line, we're increasing about $300,000. Other than the salary increases and so forth, basically we have a incremental $100,000 set aside for heavy duty, procurement consulting as we get into some more of these significant projects. And then on the bottom line, the operating taxes and licenses, it's increasing by $360,000. This is driven by the FICA and the payroll taxes associated with the increases in the top wages and both the collective bargaining folks and the administrative folks. Here's the same operating expenses sliced a little bit differently. You can see here on the wages and benefits on the top line, that's an increase of 6.693. So boiling that down, about $3.6 million of that is operations, about 800,000 is maintenance. And then the other administrative areas are about $1 million. And that includes, as we mentioned, we have incremental headcount of about 10 coming on. There's 2 exec positions that are proposed. There's 2 HR, 2 IT, 1 marketing, 1 customer service, and 1 risk management personnel. And in this category also, you see the increase of the health insurance benefits of $726,000, as well as the increase in pension expense of $661,000. On the SGR and maintenance line, as we talked before, this is increasing $1.438 million. Parts, $800,000, tires and tubes, $235,000, and then the CNG for the vehicles. The CNG, that $1 million we talked about, part of it is, a quarter of it is in here, because the fuels of the buses. Down on the lubricant, fuels and lubricants line, basically we have CNG of 365 going up and diesel coming down 328. That's why you only see a modest increase of 50,000. In the services, we're increasing $1 million there. And that is our advertising for the commercials on the radio and as well as on the TV for $1 million. The casualty and insurance decrease of $65,000. That's basically the decrease in premiums. The materials and supplies increase of $436,000. That's being driven by the software licenses that we talked about. Utilities increase of $37,000. That's being driven by an increase in telecom costs of $20,000. The training and travel is up $63,000. The biggest piece of that is in operations, a program for the training the supervisors, about $55,000 increase. And in the miscellaneous is going down $25,000. This is where the rodeo expenses are going down $65,000, and it's offset by employee appreciation. So those are kind of a walkthrough of how these operating expenses change and kind of the underlying assumptions that are under there. So turning the page to the revenue section. So the core assumptions are 0 fares are continuing through June 30th of 2024. As we said on the expense side, we were returning to the pre-pandemic service miles and service hours, but we're adding in Route 1 and 1A expansion. In here, there's going to be a change to this slide. I'm going to comment here. So on our DRPT 0 fare grant, currently we have a $2.5 million portion from DRPT, and then we have several matching components. Listed here, we have VCU matching contribution of $1,349,000. They're participating, but they're participating at $1.2 million. So the matching fare $3 million section will now be $3.149 million, of which $1.5 million of that is coming from the City of Richmond's operating contribution that is already set by the Central Virginia Transit Authority formula, and the balance of the $1,649,000 now will be coming from the GRTC reserve, which is going to be the fiscal 2023 surplus, which I'll talk about later and down the agenda. So another key item of revenue here is the DRPT operating contribution is $17.51 million for 2024. In 23, it was $19.459. This is basically the TISDAC formula for the DRPT for the Commonwealth of Virginia. We had assumed it would stay at the same level, so this was a little bit of a decrease. These are the actual numbers when I talk about the grant matches. DRPT released the final grant awards on Friday, April 21st, so we've incorporated all the actual awards in our 24 budget. And the CVTA operating contribution is $22.783 million for operations, and this is a part of the regional public transportation plan that will be brought to the CVTA board in June for approval, and this basically sets our ability to spend those funds starting July 1st of the 23. So in here in the operating contributions, City of Richmond and Wright Chesterfield County, they're driven or governed by the CVTA legislation, the codes there. So basically, the finance committee we brought to the big board here last year, this contract calls for an indexation based on CPI-EU. So we recommended that we did the short year index from June 30th of 2022 through February 28, 2023, so that we could coordinate with the municipalities and generate a budget. So the actual number is 1.53%. This is the calculation that's in there basically. So we had a CPI-U of 100.311 in June, it's 300.84 at the end of February, 1.53. The prior year from June 21 to June 22 was 9.06, and as you can see, as that are released at about the 10th of the month is still continuing to increase. Also included in here is sponsorship revenue. Right now, we're pretty conservative on the revenues. We have sponsorship revenue of $425,000 and our Plus Ad Partner Program about $180,000. We're also contemplating using FTA 5307 Flex for preventative maintenance and the max of ADA expenses. And any surplus in here from the year in operations to continue to fund to the GRTC operating reserve that we set at 25% of projected operating expenses that was approved by this board last year. So this one's a little more difficult to see. It's more line items. So starting at the top, and you see the CDTA revenue of 22,783, very similar. It's got the baseline column, and then we also have the column for grant funded projects. We have a little bit more grant funded projects in here, as you'll see by the County of Chesterfield, the 991,000. That's about the assumption of the revenue stream from the Midlothian Turnpike or Route 6. The expansion starts in January 2024, so that would be about 50% of those funds coming in from the state via Chesterfield. So as you can see here, very linear. You see the DRPT TISDAC loan I identified. The City of Richmond, the 7.314, that is net of the $1.5 million, because you'll see about 3 or 4 lines down under the Trip Zero Fare grant match for Richmond is 1.5 million. And obviously this will adjust as well because the VCU will move from 1.348 million down to 1.2, and the Trip Fare Zero grant match for reserve will go back up to 1,648,000. So including your zero fares, and you can see the various operating grants for both federal and state that's contributing. 5307 Flex, about $11.4 million. And we have COVID relief. As mentioned, we have $1 million in there to cover the advertising program. That's in the baseline. Then off to the right, the 24 grant funded projects, a local share of some of those projects in planning is going to be funded from the federal COVID relief, which is ARPA funds. So you'll see down right at the bottom, we have revenues here that are about $704,000 higher than what our expenses were. So that money would be, if everything goes as what's written on paper, that would go into the GRTC reserve at the end of fiscal 2024.
John, can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
On the CVTA revenues, you're showing 22.78 going to fund operations. But that's a portion of the overall CVTA revenues that GRTC is. So you're only appropriating 22 of
Correct.
How many million?
Probably up to 30 million.
North of 30. So there's an additional, call it $8 million.
$8 to $9 million in the reserve. So good question, is in the regional public transportation plan, you look at a 12-month section, but you also look for longer term. So what we all, as I know the board has been briefed on the zero fare presentation, as we go out in the outer years in like 28, 29, we start getting into a deficit. So as we continue to expand, we're going to be utilizing the surplus that's put aside of the CBTA side, in addition to what is in the GRTC contingency reserve that's at 25%. So kind of a double barrel reserve. So good question, I should have brought that out.
I think it's just important for the board to note that we are still, to this day, not programming all CVTA revenues because we're waiting for the results of some of our regional expansion plans, et cetera, before we would plug those in as reoccurring costs and reoccurring expenditures. So
what I can highlight when I go through the March financials, I have 2 slides from the CVTA, which one was the March 31st report, and you'll see it as with what we're referencing here. I think there was about $33 million in there before we would have the fourth quarter $5 million funding. So that leaves about $28 million available in the fund as of March 30th, and we would probably have another $7.5 million from receipts for April, May, and June going in. So it'd be about $35 million plus investment activity.
Yeah.
One of the things in here, also in here, the investment activity is increased in here We're taking advantage of the inverted yield curves. So in addition to LGIP, we have surplus funds invested in. We also put on the back of our Wells Fargo CBTA accounts or general checking, as well as our capital checking, we put treasury sweeps, which are earning about anywhere from 435 basis points to 450 basis points. And basically any idle cash above the peg goes into that. So it's very liquid, there's no restrictions. So we're trying to maximize return on this as well. That's kind of what I've got on this at the moment. So if there's any questions,
Another question. Mr. Chair, as we look at these numbers, they seem fairly heavily dependent on the expectation of the 300 operator approach. Last week in the operations committee, we talked about that, and maybe Tim can answer to it. But the question I have is that a realistic expectation in FY24 to get from 230, 240 up to 300? The downside is we have a very conservative budget, it seems like, but I don't want to aim for plugging in very high expectations that can't be met. I just don't know if we can get to 300. Is that an expectation that will be at 300 in 24?
we have an expectation to get to 300, yes.
Okay.
We built this when we were looking at the forecasting, the impact of the MOU that we issued with the outside the union contract that goes through September 30th about the top rate increase of 250. We basically forecasted that impact out, assuming that it was 10 operators per class with a certain attrition each month. So we kind of got up to 300, I believe, was like the July, August timeframe, I believe. So we have expectations that also we're trying to be conservative in there. We did not put a vacancy factor. We put what we felt was a reasonable top rate increase, but the uncertainty of that negotiation, we kind of gave ourselves that conservative flexibility in there by having a low vacancy rate on that 300, as well as what we thought was a realistic assumptions for the market sessions.
Thank you.
To your point, Mr. Chairman, if I may, to your point, part of our strategy in the finance committee has been to do just what John said, to aim for that high goal and use, as Lincoln mentioned, Lincoln was alluding to the point, use those surplus funds to plan 4 years out. So this board really needs to know that the finance committee right now is trying to structure ourselves properly for 27, 28, when we believe that the zero fare impact will begin to really have effect. So the surplus revenue plus the the CVTA gap that Lincoln was mentioning, that's really our strategy for where we'll be in 4 years. And by budgeting for the highest possible expense, we think that that will position us in a year to look at it and be better positioned each year for 3 or 4 years out. So you're exactly right. It's a high goal. If it's met, terrific. If it's not, terrific on surplus for preparation for next year. But great question. And Lincoln, I'm sorry to tag on, but that's exactly what I think Lincoln was trying to mention with regard to how we're trying to plan 3 or 4 years in advance with surplus dollars and put it away now for when we think we need it in 2017.
Okay, so just to clarify, let's look at it. So when you go down to the other revenue section, fair revenue reserve, business partnerships, that is basically the sponsorships and advertising revenue from the apps on the bus. Going down to the other income, the city appears with $200,000. That's the funding of the express routes. The other sources, that's the increase there of about $500,000. That's the impact of the interest income that's in there, plus RideFinders, paying for the salaries of the folks. So that's relatively flat, but the growth is due to the assumptions for the interest rate. So hopefully the yield curve will remain inverted for a couple more months and we can take advantage of that.
Chair. I think Councilwoman Robinson had a question first, and I come to talk.
Thank you. So the zero fare, I think that's something that is going to be extremely difficult for us to figure out how to go back to a fair rate. Folk have gotten extremely comfortable with the fact that they can ride bus without fare. And I guess the other question I have is the 1.5 million that the city is contributing toward that cost for the zero fare. Is that a one-time this year cost or?
Go ahead, Lincoln.
So
it's been waived actually. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, it's trying to remember to go back. So I want to say the total city allocation this year, John, correct me if it's 8.7, 8.9, something in that ballpark.
It's 8.7.
8.7.
Actually, 8.814.
Sorry. Of that 8.7, 1.5 is being considered the city's match to the Fare Free grant. Ms. Torres mentioned we were in the meeting, essentially the 1.5 million in additional reserves carrying over is primarily from or can be compared to the reduction in service the city has seen between the Pulse and the Route 5, I believe it is.
Yes.
So essentially that operating funds from the city's subsidy this year can be viewed as being rolling into that total $3 million match to go with the DRPT grant to keep Fare Free for the next fiscal year.
So basically what the city has to pay statutorily through CVTA, we're allowing that to cover the 1.5 million. So there's no additional cost. The city would have to pay the same amount either way.
Yeah, so it's correct. It's the Route 5 as well as the pulse reduction in frequency due to the lack of operators. That's absolutely right.
All right, I can see on Councilwoman Robinson's face that she doesn't. I don't know what that look means, but
It's a good thing.
But it's not.
So I'm trying to help. It's good. Last year, the city match, the city contribution was waived due to surplus, if you remember. And this year, I'll use the word waived again. It's just being absorbed by the already 8.7 that the city is legislatively required to fund due to the maintenance of effort with the CVTA. City is required to fund, is it 8.7?
The legislative is that it has to be no less than 50% of the fiscal 20 appropriation for public transit indexed starting last year.
So instead of it being 8.7 and 1.5 being 10.2, it's just 8.7, and the 1.5 being absorbed in the already 8.7 being funded. So it's a good thing. It's a great thing for the
I
city.
knew when we had the finance committee meeting and I looked at Lincoln and he didn't flinch that we were.
It's a good thing.
I think this is again, it's, and I also did bring up the fact that, we're north of 30 million in CVTA revenues. We're relying on 22 million of that for what you would say is, either maintenance of effort or operations today. We still see significant revenues that we know will be there for programming, for route expansions, for frequency increases, and hopefully to keep Fare Free in place in the long term.
And indicative of ridership, as you mentioned. I mean, I think it's a reasonable adjustment.
I think it's also, part of the advantage of the DRPT funding where it is scaling down as we are picking up more of the system overall, not just the city. That gap is shrinking year over year. I think where we're going to run into a prioritization need is, hopefully as Pulse and Route 5 pick back up in service, that 1.5 million from operating is going to need to go into those services, which means we'll either have to look at local or CVTA dollars for funding that gap as service gets back to pre-pandemic levels in volume.
are you good?
Thank you.
Okay, Todd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you speak to the almost $2 million decrease in operating support from the Department of Rail Public Transportation?
Okay, that's the TIS Act format. So I know that there's a lot of inputs in there. We reach the ceiling and then into where we are, and that ceiling was maintained for a couple of years. What the understanding is that in 23, when we got the incremental money, other systems ridership was down. I think they were using, stand correct me if I'm wrong, they were using the 2019 ridership numbers. So when they resubmit, other entities increased their ridership from pre-pandemic, from coming out of the pandemic. So therefore, we lost some of that increment because we were almost back to where our pre-pandemic numbers were. So certainly a formula basis on that. Because it started in 22, we had a lower number, and then we got a supplemental award in the April, May, and June of 22. That took us up to this level, and that continued through 23. So now it's without seeing all the different components, like something is that other transit entities that participate in that pool started having their ridership increase, so they kind of circled back a little bit of the incremental money we received in the end of 22 and 23.
So there's a fixed number. We had already maxed. We didn't expect as many other people to max.
Yes.
They maxed, which caused us to get a smaller percentage of the fixed number.
Correct.
All right, so, Jim, you and your group have anything to add? You guys?
I mean,
know-
everything that we covered has already been covered. So we're pretty thorough in finance committee meeting, and we've gone over it again. So.
Cheryl, you or John have anything that y'all want to add?
No. Thank you, John, just covered it really well.
Okay, so colleagues, does anyone feel the need to defer this until next month?
Well, one final question. In the operations meeting, you mentioned as we speak, unions talking about that, there's nothing that's outstanding on any kind of negotiations with collective bargaining or anything regarding this. Everything's
good until September.
Yeah, Dave, that's a great question, Mr. Chairman, if I may. Dave, that's a great question, and we've asked in our finance committee directly, and John answered it really well, that the preparation for this budget has assumptions on the conservative side to protect the budget moving into the year. So,
With the negotiation. That's what makes sense. Yeah. We asked the same thing in finance committee.
yeah.
All right, so
We
back
just
to,
don't want to talk about this.
back to my original question. Anybody feel the need to defer this until next month? All right, here ain't no need to defer. Can I get a motion to accept the operation budget and capital plan?
So move. Second.
All right, motion made in second. Final opportunity to ask any questions before we vote. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. John, thank you. Cheryl, Adrian, team, thank you. Jim, thank you for your committee work. Everybody who has something to do with putting this budget together, we say thank you. All right, let's keep moving. Ms. Thompson.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Procurement's report can be found on page 26 of your board report. I have no updates to share with you today. We're just, getting through a lot of projects. But if you have any questions regarding anything on the report, let me know. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions about procurement?
Could I just ask, I think I asked you this question recently, but just a few months back, we increased our thresholds for procurement based on the various pathways. Has that been beneficial for efficiency within the department?
It has made a significant difference in being able to execute procurements efficiently. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right,
Anything else?
good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I would assume everybody got the agenda. So let's just roll through it. Mr. Carter, then Mr. Barham, Mr. Byrd, Ms. Sink, Ms. Carter.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'll be going over the safety performance report for the month of April. This is found on pages 28 through 33 of the board package.
So hold on a second, Mr. Carter. So Madam CEO just told me that operations have seen most of these reports already. So the way finance sees the finance stuff, operations sees these reports, so.
I was gonna make it quick and say just that. We did go over a lot of this in the operations subcommittee, but I'll be happy to ask any questions from the board at this point.
Well, for those of us who are not on operations, just give me a quick synopsis.
Quick synopsis, for the month of April, numbers went down, which is, we're happy about that, but that's surprising for this time of the year, because we normally see an increase, but for the month of April, we saw numbers go down across the board. Incidents, preventable and non-preventable, as well as passenger and traffic incidents.
All right, anyone have any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Service report, operator staff. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. The operations performance report, you'll see starting on page 34. The key performance indicators pretty much remained constant for the last month. And I will point out a couple of things in a minute. Basically, we are sitting at 230 at the end of April, 230 full-time operators, 28 part-time operators, with 32 operators in various stages of training. So we did have a -2 in terms of net loss for the month. However, we have 8 of those operators in training that I mentioned earlier that are graduating in the month of May. And also with the increased number of classes, we've doubled up the number of classes each month. We'll start to see those numbers go up. So we should finish in the mid to upper 230s this month. What is also helping is retention. We have had only 3 people leave this past month. 1 person left this month so far. And as we continue, we've noticed that trend. Other than January and March, when we did see a significant amount of people leave, we haven't seen that trend continue as we have in years past. So as long as we keep those numbers going up in terms of the number of classes, graduations, and so forth, and the retention, fewer people leaving, we should see those numbers continue to go up. Predicting probably will be around 250. Everything goes well by the end of the summer. So as John mentioned earlier, as we get closer to that 300 mark, the numbers should accelerate over the next few months as we get into the late summer and into the fall. But one thing, like I said earlier, I did want to point out to you, there were some questions or a request that was made from the last board meeting. I just want to point those out to you real quickly. On page 38, you'll see the graduation numbers over the last few years. Starting with 2019, we had 9 classes, and you'll see the breakdown of the number of people who started training, how many graduated, graduation rate or the throughput, how many people are still with us. And this is updated as of this past month. So you see that a little under 59% of the employees that were hired in 2019 are still with us. When you look at 20 and 21, which was the height of the pandemic, each of those years we had 6 classes. Ironically, we had 38 people come on board each of those 2 years. Graduation rate still pretty high, over 80%. But what you notice is the decrease in the number of people who are still with us. We actually have more people percentage-wise that stayed with us in 2019 than 20 and 21. We talked about a little bit in the operations meeting in terms of what may be that factor as far as people coming in during the pandemic and then just immediately leaving. But some of the things we put in for this year, and then you look at 2022 and how we increased the number of classes to 10, percentage-wise, a little under 78% in terms of graduation rate. But we still have that, starting to see that trend go in a positive direction in terms of retention. About 66% of those people that were hired last year are still with us. And then on the next page, 39, you'll see the number of classes, number of people in each class so far this year. In the last month, we had 42 people that started training. This month, we're looking at another 12 to 13 people that are coming on board. So we're almost pretty much halfway there towards that targeted number of 100 for the year. And we haven't even reached the halfway mark. So we're projected to have at least 16 classes this year, give or take. But that kind of gives you an idea of the trend that we're going as far as the number of operators we're bringing in, and hopefully we can keep as we move forward. And unless anybody has any questions, that concludes my report.
Mr. Chair, not to step on the toes of our committee chair's report, one of the things in our committee meeting that stood out to me as we were looking at some of these reports, if you look on page 35 as an example, the top graph, on-time performance, it stood out to me that since I've been on the board, I've not seen a number where we've crossed that KPI goal. And so I asked the question, I don't want to misrepresent, but I asked the question, has 80% ever been achieved in on-time performance? And you didn't have all the data with you, but I think you said no. And so what I was inquiring was as to how did that KPI goal come about? Was it based on other systems around the country? How did we get to that? So I've asked that questions to make sure that when we set goals, we're setting them to where they are reachable but achievable, high attaining and so forth. But if we never reach it, then it sort of loses its value to be studied. So just wanted to share that with the board.
Thank you. That's good. That's something definitely for us to think about. Any other questions?
Mr. Chair, one on the training stuff. One, thank you for the reports. That's this kind of stuff. So 42 people have started class this year. In 21 and 20 COVID, we didn't hit that. 38 people total started training, total. The max we've had start training in a year was 68. We're already at 42. We had 5 classes already start. The max classes we ever had in a year has been 10. 42 people starting, even at a 75% graduation rate, it's 32. And we're only 5 classes into the year.
That's why we kept 3.
Stay the course. So thank you for the reports. Numbers are numbers. Cheryl, I would say thank you for your response to this recruiting and numbers. And I know the spend is working. The $1 million John just talked about, the spend is working, the commercials are working, the training, the recruiting, the retention is working. And I think the numbers only indicate that the trend and the tracking we're on are going to put us in a place where we want to be in 4 to 8 to 12 months.
And if I may, our HR department is telling me they're going through, evaluating like 60 applications. So it is definitely, they're coming.
Can I ask a question? How long have you been here?
About 10.5 years.
Okay. In a similar role?
Yes.
Okay. So help me again, just revision, we were at our peak back in summer of fiscal year 21 with 290 operators.
Yeah, roughly July 2020.
We started trickling down. So that was COVID though.
Yes. We haven't got it back.
Yeah, so the trickle started during COVID. So you would attribute it to COVID?
To some degree. I mean, we talked about the Great Resignation, which really started impacting us going into 2021. As things started opening up, people started changing jobs, and we weren't immune to that during that period. But yeah, there was a significant drop starting around as we got into 2021, and it carried over into 2022.
And some of it also had to do with the mask mandate enforcement. We did have operators who had issues with that, and they would leave because it was difficult.
Wearing a mask?
No, enforcement with the customers, when we had mandatory mask mandates on.
Yeah, a lot of incidents, with the customers and the operators.
So fiscal year 22, we took a hit. We went down almost about 25 operators. Okay, I mean, this is just good. It's good information to know. We were at a place of 290 operators just 2 fiscal years ago. So it's attainable. I'll tell you, I'm gonna have to work hard to climb this mountain, but I think we can do it.
One step at a time.
One climb at a time.
Yeah. Any questions? Any other questions? All right, thank you, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm here for the maintenance department. That's down on the report, down on page 4.
And that department actually deserves that.
Yeah. Thank you. Currently, we only understaffed 2 employees with the prison utilities. We're fully staffed with techs at this time. We had a committee meeting on last week, and I'm here for any questions.
Questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
You just The next meeting, just make up something. Tell us you had a more skill or something. We appreciate you running an efficient shop.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm going to be referring to the ridership report on page 43 of your packet. Looking month over month, we were down across all modes by about 5.5%. Not too concerned with that. March did have 3 extra weekdays. And looking overall at the weekday average from March to April, that was only down 1.2%. So most of that variance can be accounted for by those 3 extra weekdays. Looking back to pre-COVID in April 2019, we are up on local fixed route by over 14%. We still remain down on the Pulse and Express routes, but overall we are trending positive, and fiscal year to date is trending positive over both last year, FY22, and pre-COVID, FY19. There are no questions. That concludes my report.
Question. All right, thank you, Ms. Singh. Appreciate it. Ms. Carter.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm going to report on the rider comments, which can be found on pages 45 to 46 of the package. I do realize that this was already reviewed in the operations subcommittee meeting last week. Just want to highlight a few things. One being that the total number of complaints for the month was down significantly from the previous month, which is good news. And also there's one category that had a higher number of questionable complaints, again, emphasizing it doesn't mean it didn't happen. We just couldn't confirm it either way based on the information provided by the complainant. And then on
what category was that?
This was route operator. And then looking at the trends, in particular for the commendations, again, there was a slight increase in the previous month. And I would just like to also outline that one of those of the 9, one of those commendations, again, numbered several operators within that one commendation. So speaking to their excellent customer service. So that concludes the report. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Just a question. I don't know if it's for you, Ms. Carter, maybe. Sure. For our CEO. How do we evaluate the operators? Is it annual? They sit down with HR to get a review? What's that process?
No, they do not receive a review. The operators do not. What we do is we track by operator if the number of complaints and valid versus verified versus non-verified. And then there is progressive discipline based on that. But there are different criteria in our rule, operator rule book that they have to comply with. And then if they don't, that's when we bring them in to address those. But they do not receive a formal package.
Okay. What about like annual? Do they have to go through like any annual training or anything?
They do. They have their refresher training. They have quarterly safety meetings, but they also have annual refresher training.
What about customer service part of the customer service part of it?
That is part of it. It's part of it initially doing their initial training, as well as when they do the refresher training. And then we also focus on that during our quarterly safety meetings. That is a part of it.
Okay.
We ever thought about giving away like Wawa gift card once a month if you get your name drawn because you weren't a route operator for the year or something?
There's 2 things for that. They're just speaking Joe's language. So that's why
I mean, we can track route operator, but that means if you look at these numbers versus the number of operators, that means we have a lot of operators that weren't route, and we only talk about the bad side. We should talk about the good side.
That's correct. So we are starting an employee of the month program. As a matter of fact, June 1st is our deadline to start that. So that will appreciate some of that. But we have talked about gift cards and giving away gift cards. So yes, thank you for that.
Joe, you're not eligible.
Yes.
So that's a good idea, though. Yeah.
Don't forget that.
Yeah, people want to be celebrated. Yeah.
Well, you
Find
also
ways to celebrate.
think about being rude a little bit more when, if you're thinking about being rewarded for not being rude.
Okay. Thank you for standing up there and all that.
No way.
Basically, look at that.
Mr. Chair, the finance report is on page 47, so I'm just going to talk off the highlights here. This is the 9 months ended March 31st. Very similar to our previous discussions, our revenues are unfavorable to budget by $4.4 million, and that's being driven by the federal funds due to lower than budgeted operating expenses, offset by favorable interest income. The operating expenses year to date are below budget by $3.8 million, and this is being driven by lower than budgeted headcount, primarily in transportation and administration. Maintenance, as Tony has briefed, is getting close to his headcount, so we're not seeing any variance or a great variance in maintenance is taking over the pace of the volume, as what we're also seeing in transportation. Due to the fact, just to remind you all, is that the increase in top pay that started on April 9th, which is not reflected in here, but all the other incentives, the $2 attendance bonus, as well as the shift differentials, were not contemplated in 2023 budget, so therefore the rates were unfavorable. So we see on the top line that $2.1 million favorable variance for labor. That's primarily all in the fringe, because we don't have the headcount not paying the pensions for that, nor the medical. So that's the majority, more than half of that is in the fringe line. And we lower the budgeted materials and supplies, still favorable budgeted fuel prices. I was too pessimistic on what the fuel was going to do in 23 when we put this budget together last year, as well as due to the time of the consulting project, as I mentioned, the transit ridership plan, strategic plan, and the ridership studies are getting underway, so they're a little bit off the pace of what the budget was contemplated. Through the 9 months, we have a surplus of about $4.5 million. The full year forecast, we're anticipating, $3.5 million to $4.5 million, because I mentioned that the top rate increases effective April 9th. So we're expecting to see a little more expense and see some possibly some of the surplus diminish over the next 3 months. Balance sheet and cash flow, strong cash position, $12.89 million, of which about $9 million is in the operating cash account. Just want to bring to the attention, as we were talking about it in the budget presentation, the slides with regards to CBTA. So this is the CBTA that quarter ending March 31st. You should see down on the bottom green bar, there was $33.45 million in the fund invested between Wells Fargo, as an eligible. You can see here in the bottom portion, there's a quarterly draw. So this is the third quarter draw that's shown as 5.455 million. That came out April 1st. So that 33 million goes down to 28 million. So the next slide, this is the one that's the detail. This is showing people activity. As you can see right at the top, we received another $2.5 million distribution plus $63,000 in interest income in that LGIP account. So we're ending the month of April at about $30.6 million, and in the budget we have 22 million. So we already have all that money plus at least $8 million in reserve. And looking at, there's nothing to lead me to believe that we would not receive another $2.5 million for the distribution we received in May, and another $2.5 million for the distribution we received in June. So I expect this number to be about $35 million, and it's invested. So hopefully with the sweeps and the rates will continue to grow. So with that, I'll conclude the finance briefing as if there's any questions.
Questions? So, Jim, do you want to add anything on top of that? We can go ahead and just
No, I think
back your committee report on it.
yeah, I think that between what we did earlier and that, that's the whole committee report.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? All right, thank you, sir. Councilwoman Robinson, do you have anything from operations committee?
Just want to say that The operation committee is probably the best committee that we have in this board. I say that because we cover, you know, probably 90, outside of the budget, we cover every other operation and what's happening with operation, and you really get to experience the total operation of this corporation. And the staff is doing a super job. The reporting is great. You know, the recruitment and bringing in the operators, they're online. We do ask them sometime about their performance indicators as to whether or not they are realistic as it relates to the performance and what's going on. So we also talked a little bit about the fact that as we recruit more operators, we would expect to see a decrease in overtime pay, and also taking that into consideration as it relates to the employees, and they're accustomed to those kinds of having to do those extra hours and so forth, and making sure that we're sensitive to that in the process. So I think the board seems to be pleased with all of the review of the reports that we received, which is what we spent an hour talking about in quite detail. And I think overall the committee is very pleased with what we see happening. Any other committee members want to elaborate, that's fine as well. But
Can I ask a question of Tim? What's the so we're in the 230s now with 30 something people in the training process. What's the cutoff where you will see a kind of steep decline in overtime? Like when we get to how many operators you make? And how do you think the operators will respond? How? Because some probably are pretty, they probably like the overtime.
Yeah, to answer your last question first, you are correct. We do have several operators that do take full advantage of those opportunities of available work, and we appreciate that. We don't have hours of service rules like over the road operators, that CDL operators that run over interstate. And because we're interstate, we don't have those service hours rules other than the 10 hours off that's required in the contract. So we are cognizant of that as from a safety perspective. But going back to your earlier question, yes, my thinking is that as we get up into that 260, 270 range, but then it's also proportionate to the number of runs too, because Adrian, Sam, and that group, continue with, the request of jurisdictions and the customer needs to add that work proportionally. So as we add work, there'll still be overtime opportunities. It won't be in that 7% range. Maybe it'll be down a little more in the 3 to 4%. But there still will be some opportunities for overtime, just not as robust as we've had previously. And some folks do use this as a part-time job, and we make no bones about that as well. So yes, that is something we're sensitive about, but we'll keep monitoring it. And like I said, we will have some opportunities for overtime, and that won't go away.
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Any other operations question?
I have a comment.
Okay.
To answer Mr. Anderson's question about the OTP KPI, that is industry standard, and most transit agencies have it at 80%, some even have it a little bit higher. So that's why I said it.
Do they meet theirs? Do we know that?
We can do some research on if you want to see. We are part of AEP, which is like a national comparison thing.
Right.
Actually, a lot of them do it theirs.
Okay.
But the best practice is also based on like 90% for like express routes. So it's higher based on versus probably 90% for rail. So that should go into consideration. It has to do with like the resiliency
Overall
of the
system.
riders. You don't want to ride something, is 50% and is not most likely half the time isn't going to come.
Right.
So 80% is kind of the threshold for comfort for rail.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, anything from you, Ms. Adams?
Two things.
I would like to introduce our new communications specialist. She came in a little bit after we started. Henry Benson is here. First day was yesterday. And he will be taking over some of Ashley's duties. We thank Ashley for filling in while we hired Henry. So excited to have him on board. And the only other thing I had is last month I mentioned about staff working on a new vision, mission, core value. We are at the point now where we would like to present those to the board. So Joe will be reaching out to you to get some dates for possibly the end of June, to give you a little time, end of June, early July, so that we can present those and get your feedback. And other than that, that's all I have today.
All right, thank you. Again, I want to thank staff. Thank you, board members, committee leaders, for the work you put in. And I really feel like we have a good staff here, and they're putting in the work, and I think we're starting to see some differences. We want to continue to set the bar high so we can get to where we're trying to get to. But I feel like the board is trying to hold a certain level of accountability. Staff is holding each other accountable. And I think that's a good thing. So sure that you or Adrian want to talk about Kansas City at all. Your first inner city visit with Chamber RVA.
From our standpoint, it was a good visit.
Well, I'm sorry, let me say this first. Several of you around the table have gone on Chamber RVA inner city visits. If you haven't, it is, I don't know how old it is now, 20 years, maybe longer than that, I don't know. Every year, the Chamber picks a place that supposedly, I thought should align with who we are. It seems like we're starting to get away from that a little bit. So that we can go and see some comparable things in other places. And so we go and hear from those localities, and we take little field trips and go see what they do. The best part of it probably is the camaraderie and fellowship. And we take 150, 200 leaders from the area and take them somewhere else, and a lot of good conversations come out of it. So I know Lincoln was there, and Andreas was there, and I was there. Cheryl and Adrian went for their first time. So last year, I think Julie and Joe went. And so anyway, so just for those of you who may not know. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I was gonna say, I think the best part of it was making those contacts. Even though the people are right here in the city, you would think those contacts had already been made, but to get in that environment and make the contacts was valuable. And also they had a track on their transit system, which is interesting. I'm not sure if anyone wants to add anything else.
Yeah, it was just good having a comparison, I would say, related to your transit system, you got any buses, which was surprising to us in their downtown area. But yeah, their system was something to think we could take from them, but others would say we're already doing pretty great, which is, I think, the chamber said validation for Richmond.
So I think Casey, Adrian said they had regular buses, yeah, BRT, and then they had this electric car thing, streetcar, that was like, went 2 miles. And just didn't really see the point of it, but how much money did they spend on that?
110 million.
Yeah. So it just went, it literally went 2 miles, and then I think it came down the other side of the street, 2 miles, and yeah, just interesting. So but again, fellowship was good. It just so happened, Cheryl mentioned to me while we were there that VCU was looking at some reduction in some money. So this is where you can have some of those conversations. So, but it ended up being a good time. Adrian, if you don't mind, I think, did Axios run something? Was it Axios that ran something about a BRT regular service analysis or something?
Yes.
Yeah, can you speak to that for the board members that may not have seen that? Yeah, even where you go.
Yeah, they did run an article about the reliability of the homes and the run times in comparison to
pre-2018. They compared it to what the TSP was supposed to do as far as reduction. It wasn't an apples to apples comparison where the city of Richmond was in terms of like traffic flow today. It's very different to one of the first studies done back in 2014. We did even another version in 2016 of the traffic model, and that was completely different in terms of runtime. The 2014 model just shows what 2 years can do. So that's a big difference. Another factor is they didn't incorporate the loads. The Route 6 had 24 other routes that also went on Broad Street, and the loads on the pulse. I mean, I've been on the pulse and saw the 50 actually kind of beat us, but there was it didn't stop. So no one was using it. So therefore, if you're stopping more often people are using it, it does impact the run times. But overall, the TSP and the queue jumps are still working. And another thing that we're doing is the way that the BRT is designed compared to what local service is just the frequency. It's 10 to 15 minute frequency, just making sure that actually comes in the segments that it's supposed to come is very different than a local route. So again, that's not a comparison that can happen. I would say if you compare the local routes to the BRT today, we are going to do that analysis to actually look at it, but you would see just reliability, the station, all of that is completely different, non-apples to apples comparison.
Okay, thank you. So generally, I don't have any comments, but Faith Walker at RVA Rapid Transit, Faith is the executive director, usually have a representative here. They're trying to educate local elected officials, so they've come up with this idea of doing what they call mobility university. So some of you may see this. They may be reaching out to board supervisors or council members to be a part of an event at the end of June. So just know that it is something that I'm supporting and trying to help the colleagues of yours who are not on the board but want to know more about GRTC and public transit. RVA Transit is trying to pull that together through Mobility University. So I think they're tapping into staff here to get some help with that. So last thing, Cheryl and I think Bonnie did some research on, remember last month we talked about proxy votes or something. So they have something before that.
Yes. To do a proxy vote requires us changing our bylaws, which requires the shareholders to go back and it's really involved if we want to do it that way. But one thing we did find out in our research is if it would help, we do have the option of changing the time of the board meeting. And I know CBTA and TPO did change their times to a little bit later time to accommodate their board members. So if you all choose the route of going to try and move into the proxy vote, it is possible. It's just a lengthy process. And I'll have fun at it.
So because you're a stock corporation, the way to proxy voting would be through a shareholder agreement. And that also needs to be reflected in your organizational documents. For the shareholders to act, that means the governing bodies have to act. So it would be the Industrial Board of Supervisors and Richmond City Council in order to put together a shareholder agreement and authorize entry into that, and then incorporate it into the governing documents. But the bylaws require only that this meeting occur on the third Tuesday of each month. It does not say that this meeting needs to occur at 8 a.m. The third Tuesday of each month. So you do have the flexibility to change the start time of the meeting if that would be your pleasure.
But it does specify third Tuesday.
It does, yes.
So the problem,
shareholders meeting and then in the fall.
October.
the problem has become, I'm sorry, Jim, that we need 2 people from each locality to vote. So that's where the proxy conversation came from. Now, if it's as simple as, and I don't know if it's as simple as this, making a meeting at 8:30 and 9 o'clock. Like today, everybody was here. I actually was 7 days late. Andres is late. I won't tell you how much longer he was late.
He was on
I mean, all of us were here. So do we want to do about a proxy, or do we just want to try to push the meeting back, or do we want to just say, hey,
I think we should think about allowing some time for it to take place, and at the next regularly scheduled shareholders meeting, we try to implement it. Which gives time for proxy. I think we should do the proxy, but I think we should not try to do it too fast. Let's do it at the next shareholder meeting.
Yeah,
It's regularly scheduled shareholder.
Obviously, you have to wait till October. I'll be honest with everybody. I'm the one that brought it up. It's hard sometimes to make sure three of us are here. And I think that we've proven this board is very capable. And I think together, if votes are able to be carried by each other in agreement, then I think that
We
that's
do it in
functional.
RVAs.
I think we have till October now, so I appreciate the research. And I just would ask everybody to consider it. Just assuming that 2 out of the 3 of us couldn't make a meeting, that business wouldn't be held up, that one person could speak to their other 2 counterparts and make sure it carried the weight for their jurisdiction if we had a vote. Simple votes. If you think about it, approval of minutes, we can't do it. Cannot approve minutes. If
we can defer
2 of
something
us-
if we feel that we need to have
That's
more
just
people
what I-
present, but at least we can have a meeting.
Trying to avoid.
So that's in Michael, Chesterfield, Richmond, Lincoln, Andreas, what do you think? Proxy or liquor store?
I like having more meetings with that one. I like having more meetings with that one, so I'm okay with it.
I was just gonna say, I think, I don't know if both is an option. I think, just, we all kind of came into these roles with the times preset, right? So we haven't really had a discussion on what time works best for this group. And so, I know, I have a 2-year-old, so 8 a.m. is hard. And this meeting does also conflict with another board I sit on, the Richmond Ambulance Authority. So I've been neglecting those duties to be here as we've been getting up and running, but that time 4 times a year is a conflict for me. But so I think we should pursue the proxy as a kind of a default for things but time into the next shareholders meeting, so we can just have it all adopted at once instead of something mid-year. But if the chair and the rest of the board's open to it, I wouldn't mind polling to see if there's a time later in the day that works for most folks. I know you prefer the 8 a.m.
Oh, yeah, right. But no, I think it is challenging. It could be challenging. I mean, it takes me probably a half an hour to get over here in the morning. This location is not easily accessible. You just, but that's not going to change. And, I would just soon continue with the 8 o'clock meeting. We get here, we get it done. We run a great meeting, we get out in a reasonable time. And so I think that's what we've been doing all along. I mean, I think we'll continue with that. Proxy is a great option to consider, depending on how much is going to be required to put that in place. I think we just need to work closer with each other and with my colleagues. If for some reason I know I can't attend, it's just important for us to work with each other to make sure that we get here.
With Plan REA, we have a proxy, but also you have the ability of doing it remotely, and you have to have a reason for it. So if you cannot attend and you want to be there virtually, there is a conversation of I have
It has to be approved by the chair for a approved reason.
So I was just thinking through going to proxy, I don't want to have it be there's only half the year, because that would be the default. It's the easier way to do it. I still want to be that we are working together as a team and that is communicated. If proxy is needed in instances, which happens, that's not the default of, well, it's going to be there, so.
I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, let's look at, let's look, Cheryl, maybe, Bonnie, if you guys can, well, the proxy seems like everybody's kind of in agreement. Let's move on that. Maybe consider the virtual option. I don't know. Yes.
The one thing I would suggest too regarding the proxy is, and maybe this is already in the soup, but putting guardrails on the types of things that can be subject to proxy, keeping operations moving, keeping consent agenda items, keeping minutes and all that kind of stuff, but things like we did today, budget or personnel issues. To your point, Andreas, we want to make sure that, I'm covered because we got proxy can be a creep that we don't want.
Well, that's what my comment was on, there may be some items that we want to defer even if we can vote because we want to have the whole group or more of the group.
Well, I just wanted to put it out there so we can have some discussion about it. I think we probably need to have some safeguards around proxy in general. I know none of you guys will do it, but you don't want to be in a position where one person has one thought and the other two don't, but the one person with the proxy goes the way that you want to go. I mean, I know that wouldn't happen this week, but the possibility could happen. Somebody was gonna say something else. And the time, I guess when I was thinking time, I was thinking maybe like 8 to 8:30, 8 to 9. But thinking is introduce it maybe a later time of the day. Maybe sure we can just send out an email. Generally, we do good. Honestly, this is a longer meeting for us, an hour and a half. So.
But we had the budget today.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
passed the budget.
Yeah, so my point is, the committee meetings have helped keep this meeting efficient. It wouldn't have worked the way we were doing it when we first got on last year, because those were 3-4 hour board meetings. Nobody was trying to let those drag into the middle of the day.
Right.
So let's just throw it out there and see what happens. In the meantime, let's just keep on trying to get to 8 o'clock. It's a struggle.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
and I'm not sure, it may have been mentioned earlier, I'm changing the subject a little bit. We had talked, either in one of the committees, or I think it probably was in committee, that it would be good for the board to have like a retreat where we look at strategies of how we move forward. When I was looking at the budget and I was looking at the board goals in the budget report that we want to achieve this year, which I thought was really spot on. But I was thinking, we had talked about maybe having an opportunity to have a work session or retreat or something of that nature to get more clarity from operations staff, how we want to achieve those goals, what kinds of things we need to put in place, what kind of additional policy things that needs to be taken in consideration. We talked about a lot of really critical items, and I got the opportunity to see a work board that they use to help make those decisions, which is really fascinating. And I think it would be not only beneficial for the board, but to the extent that other supporters, partners that we have as a part of that opportunity to get that full appreciation would be extremely beneficial for us, I think, and would like to ask that we put that on the agenda for further discussion and the merits and the value of doing such.
So, I'm thinking some hours. We're not talking about like going away or anything. I'm just talking about some hours, maybe here. We log off some time, not doing a board meeting. 4 or 5 hours ago, maybe not, I don't know. But let's talk about it. I like the idea, honestly. It's not a board meeting. It's a vision, mission, casting, looking.
We could
That's
do
what we
that.
wanted to do in the end of June, early July. I mentioned that positioning, all of that would be included, so. yeah.
Is there a month that makes sense that the board could do that once a year versus a board meeting that month? And just make that a yearly exercise?
What about one of the summer months? I don't know, listen. I mean, I'll just throw it out there. We don't have to make a decision right now.
We don't have to, I just think that it's a great thing for us to consider doing unless they come back with some recommendations.
We're a new board.
Got to be at least 1 month. Staff is always very busy and very good at what they're doing, but that board staff relationship is one that should be coming, the board should be setting that vision and review
executing that. And so if we're busy just looking at how operations, how maintenance and all of that, we're not paying attention to what's happening 10 years from now, 20 years from now.
So because we need the vision, mission, core values, and objectives as part of our TSP plan, we need to present it to you all as soon as possible. That's why I suggested end of June, early July. And I don't think that's too soon for us to incorporate all of the other things.
Yeah. I'm gonna add to the transit strategic plan is something that we do every 6 years. So I think 6-ish years, and so this is just a great opportunity and we want to get it to them by like August. So having it in June, July is just ideal to be able to have that information and put in that document. And so that incorporates all of that, but it also goes over finance, budget, allocation, all of that stuff will be covered. So we are actually approaching it as more of a retreat for you guys. And what we did with internal staff is exactly, it was 5 hours. We sat from like 9 to 3 together, went through, and we even got the point of going through initiative. So we want to do the exact same exercise. It's not almost just presenting it to you, but giving you what we kind of do, your feedback, workshopping it with you, really getting into the details of the organization. So
Mr. Chair, I would also like to offer that I don't have any opposition to going somewhere other than.
Yeah. So that, I mean, that's great. I mean, okay, so it sounds like this is, and maybe next year we can pick another date, but let's try this sometime maybe in July. And let's not have a board meeting in July. But if we do have board business, because we are a board, we can do board business during the retreat. And that will be our piece.
If we advertise it that way, we can do that.
Yeah. So you just gotta find somewhere nice to go feed us.
Yes.
All right, so you just let us know, and we'll do, I know July is like a vacation month, so we'll do, try to get as many together as possible.
Yeah, we'll set out some dates.
Okay. All right, good people, any other business? All right, have a good day.